let's go to page 28 and let's talk about these estates. First of all, I would make sure I know the definition. Hey, that's a good test question though. Remember I said you will have some definition questions, but not all of your questions are going to be definition. That makes sense, I guess. But this is a good definition question. Page 28. The amount and kind of interest that a person in real property, that a person has in real property is called estate. Estate in land. It's the kind of interest. What kind of interest do you have? Well, now let's keep this simple. This is what we're talking about. Do you own it or are you leasing it? That's the kind of interest we're talking about, but those are not the words we're going to use, but that's what we're talking about. Do you have ownership interest or do you have possession interest only? Rental interest. So, freehold and non. Freehold means ownership interest. Non-freehold is another way to say leasehold, which just means you don't own the property, you're renting it, or you have possession of it. So freehold means ownership interest. You own your house, you've got freehold interest. Now guys, these are just kind of legality kind of terminology, but you may see it later in your real estate career, you may not. But freehold means ownership interest. Now when you hear the word, or even when you read and saw the word estate, what came to your mind? What comes to your mind when you hear the word estate?
Acres, property.
Lots of property. What else? Yeah. We just met our lawyer yesterday. We're doing our will again. Planning your estate. You know, you think about that. The Biltmore estates. Well, those are just other ways to use the term. Right now, from a real estate point of view, we're just saying what kind of interest do you have? Keep it simple. And freehold, we said, is ownership. Look on page 29. Indeterminable length. We don't know how long we're going to own our property, do we? I mean, you can have a game plan and say, I'm going to own my house for 10 years, then I'm going to move up. But really and truly, it's indeterminable. It's not finite. There's not a definite ending on it. So you're going to own it, indeterminable, maybe for a lifetime, maybe forever. I want you to, are you with me on this first paragraph on 29? It's passed from grantor to grantee via or with a deed. Guys, I would highlight that sentence. It's passed, or that section. Is passed from grantor to grantee with a deed. And the deed is the title, and we also say it's being conveyed. So let's talk about these words just quickly because they do come up in Unit 5. Freehold estates are passed from grantor to grantee. The grantor is the owner of the property or the seller. That's the grantor. The grantee is the receiver or the buyer. Couldn't you own real estate and give it to someone? People gift all the time. So you still would be called the grantor, even though you're not selling, you do own it. You're giving it to a grantee, the receiver. They're not a buyer, but they're still receiving it, aren't they? So the giver is the grantor and the receiver is the grantee, and we'll see this again in Unit 5. And then they say this happens with the deed. Everyone, the deed is the document. It's a piece of paper that shows your ownership. It shows who owns it. It shows what kind of ownership, what kind of interest you have. So we use this document called a deed, and it's also called the title. It's called the title to our house. If you buy a car, don't you get a title to your car? So when you buy a house, you get a title to your house. We just call it a deed, usually. And we already saw that word convey. Convey means transfer. There are 4 types of freehold. Now, by the way, freehold is just a legal terminology. Don't overthink it or over dissect it. I'm not going to talk about it any other way other than its ownership. Except it does not mean free and clear. Lots of us own our property in quotes, but we're paying on it, right? So it doesn't mean you own it free and clear, but you have an ownership kind of interest. You're not renting it. So the highest and the best form is fee simple absolute. So go with me, if you will, to page 30. Remind yourself this is level 1, so let's just talk about what this means. Fee simple absolute, that's going to be the type of interest that you will see in your real estate business. I'm going to say 99.99999 times out of every time you look at a property or every time you list a property. Most owners own their property fee simple absolute. It's just the terminology. I like the word absolute though because it reminds me that it's absolutely the best form of ownership interest. It's the best way to have interest in real estate because it's the best. You can do whatever it is you want to as long as it's not against the law. What I mean is you can sell your property if you want to. You have a right to. You can will your property if you want to. You have a right to. You can gift it. You can lease it. So you can do whatever it is that you want to do. It's the best. That's a wonderful test question. Which of the following is the highest or the best form of interest in real estate? It would be fee simple or fee simple absolute. If the answer choices just said fee simple and then some other stuff, if they don't say absolute, fee simple is an appropriate answer. Fee simple. The reason they've got absolute there is because there's another form of fee simple called defeasible, and so there is a difference. So when you go into the real estate business, and I can show you this, and I'll show you later on. In the listing agreement that we just looked at, there is language in that listing agreement that says, seller, we want you to transfer, convey, fee simple, absolute. So it's in our listing agreement. That's standard language. That's what we expect. On the sales contract that I showed you, there's a section there, the buyer saying, I want fee simple, absolute. So it's really what you're going to see in your real estate business. All the 30 years I sold and listed real estate, I saw one other thing one time, and it was a life estate that I'm going to talk to you about. I never saw any other difference. The whole thing is we're learning everything. We're just not going to learn what you're prone to see in your career. We're learning everything about it. If you hear something different, you need to at least recognize that's something that we don't use. Let me ask my broker in charge about it. Are you following me on it? But fee simple, and for testing, you could be asked about one of the other ones. Alrighty, so look at fee simple defeasible. Defeasible, everybody, is a strange word, isn't it? Your reading says something like it can be defeated. Another term they used was it's qualified. So how about this word? I think this makes sense. How about its condition? There's a condition. If you have this ownership interest, you have it with a condition. So conditional, qualified. You got to stay qualified to own it. In other words, if the type of interest says you must use it for this, well then that's the condition, isn't it? Or if it says you can do anything you want to with it except but don't do this. Isn't that a condition? And as long as you adhere to that condition, you're good to go as far as your ownership interest. Once that's broken, we could even say it's a breach. Once it's broken, then you didn't stay qualified the way you were instructed to. So let's talk about the two different ones, and honestly, looking at the examples is the best way. So look with me at, let me find the best example here. That's not it. the first example, I beg your pardon, middle of the page 30. Take a minute and read your first example. Alrighty, this is an example of a defeasible, but it's called condition subsequent. This is the one that has a don't do this, not this. So in other words, your example said you can use this and do whatever you want to. You've got ownership interest, but not this one thing. Don't sell alcohol on the property. Everyone, if you really think about it, if you own real estate, you've got some rights of some kind of control, don't you? Don't you think you have a right if you want to give property to someone, you can have the lawyer put a condition in it? Don't you think even if you sell it, you can have the lawyer say, I'll sell it, but I want this condition adhered to. The buyer doesn't have to buy it. The receiver doesn't have to take it. But as an owner, you have some rights to say what you want the property to be used for or not used for. Typically in our real estate residential, we don't run into this, to be honest with you, but this could happen. I personally think these things happen, the examples we're looking at, I think it happens when people give property. You know, I think about putting this on the real estate market. If you think about putting a house on the market and you read the agent remarks, well, this house will be sold as long as you don't sell alcohol on it. I mean, that's a little sounding silly, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't feel very marketable to me. How many buyers are going to want to look at that? I don't know that we're thinking about selling alcohol, but it's a condition, though, isn't it? So it feels to me this might be more of a gift, but doesn't have to be. Mm-hmm.
You mind if I say something about that? With the reversionary right of it being a gift, say somebody who's extremely wealthy and is a philanthropist and gives money for a park. And then they say, okay, well, on this park, as long as you keep this park, Raleigh, you can't sell alcohol on it. Well, if the family who gave the land finds out that all of a sudden there's going to be liquor houses on the property, they can go through court proceedings and say, hey, we want that land back. So that reversionary right means that, yeah, we're going to give it to you, yeah, use it for fun and entertainment, but because this was our property, we want to make sure it stays this way and used in this purpose, which means it can always revert back to them if you don't use it for the purpose stated.
Yeah, that's a good example, more of a gift like that, and the intention of the land, we don't want to see anything other than that. But the key thing that she mentioned is it's not an automatic reversion. Reversion means reverts back to the original person who granted it, but this is not automatic. It's one that if those people that were wealthy gave this land and they said no alcohol sales, if they come back 20 years later and they see that that's going on, they can go to court. It'll be up to a judge, and the judge might say to them, golly, this has been going on for the last 19 years. I think you're kind of late to the table, right? It's up to the judge. So it ain't going to be automatic. However, the next one is, look at your last example on page 30. This one's called determinable. This one feels a little more serious to me. Alrighty. Does that one sound more serious to you? I bet you've even heard of that one. People give to their church. You know, I'm going to give this, I own a house next door to the church, and I want to give this house to the church for youth activity. Well, so it does make sense. If I give it for this reason, that's the reason I'm giving it, and I want the attorney to write that in the deed. Everyone, if it's not in writing, it isn't going to be enforceable, is it? You know, you can say these are my intentions, but it needs to be in writing. And so it has a time thing, so long as you use it this way. And if the church, in this example, does not use it this way, it is an automatic reversion. So that's a good test question. Which one of the following has an automatic reversion? Automatic means the prior owner doesn't have to go to court to let the judge make a decision. They might have to get a lawyer to get this all finished up, but they're not leaving it up to the courts for the decision. In the deed, the way it's worded, the wording says what's going to happen. If you don't use it for religious purposes, it will automatically revert. By the way, there's no money changing hands, because you all see by now, if those conditions are broken, it's a breach, isn't it? So the original grantor does not have to buy it back. The person who has received it has broken the condition. By the way, when those conditions are over, it's going to go back to the best way it was before, fee simple, because it's no longer one of these because the condition was broken. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Look with me on top of page 31. Let's talk about some life estates. Now, everyone, we are talking about ownership. Yes?
I have a question about the Biltmore estate. You know how you go see the house and everything. Is that like something through the family? Like when you go visit the house?
You know what? I'm sure a big corporation owns that now. You know, it was a family. It was the Vanderbilts, I believe. Real rich people way, way, way back. And they owned all of that. And as far as heir, there's probably still heirs involved. But it was a family holding, and it still may be. But it's commercially operated now, isn't it? I can't imagine anybody lives there unless it's the people that run the place. All righty, on page 31, life estates. Look at the reading. It's a freehold estate. Now, we know freehold means ownership. Guys, make sure you remember that. We're really looking at this kind of just on the surface, but this is what confuses students. When students get a question about a life estate, for some reason it throws them and they don't think it means ownership. We're still talking about ownership. You know, someone just owns the property for their life or for somebody else's life, but it's ownership. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, because that's the way you probably heard it, but it's ownership. Amber, I'm sorry, but Amber said, is it like what you hear, lifetime rights? That's the way you may hear it, but it is a life estate. And life estate means ownership for your life or for somebody else's life. And so what I want to talk to you about first is the one for somebody else's life, because that's what I've got on the board. Go to the next page, 32. Life estate pure attribute. Pure attribute reminds me of a student some time back who asked me this question early on in the class. He said, Jan, why are there so many words in here that are Latin? And I never really thought about it. And I said, are there? And he said, yeah, there's a lot of Latin words in here. Well, what comes to my mind is it's all about law, isn't it? And legal stuff, and then that kind of comes from Latin derivative. So pure attribute means, and I'm at the top of 32, it means for the life of another. Pure attribute, life of another. Alrighty, best way to see it is to read the example, in my opinion. So take a moment and read about Austin and Carl. Second paragraph, 32. Now, when I asked you what you thought about the word itself, estate, I do think about estate planning, to be honest with you, because I'm old now. You start thinking about that. This is a really good example of estate planning. You know, Austin says, I want this property back, but for now, I want my brother to own this property. It's true ownership, a deed passes. I want my brother to own it because he's a little bit, I'm going to make up some story here. My brother's a little down on his luck, but he's got some children, and I've got this house, it's been a rental, but I would like for my brother to have a place for his kids to live. And so the way I'm going to ask the lawyer to word it, because I do want it back, because maybe I want it to go into my estate planning, and maybe my kids get it later on, right? So I'm going to have a lawyer write this up, that I'm going to grant it to you, Carl. There's a deed. We're conveying it. But the language says, for as long as your young daughter or the disability, they added that to the book, I think. As long as your daughter with the major disability is alive. You own it based on somebody else's life, this young daughter. So pure attribute means life of another. So it's not based on Carl's life, it's based on his young daughter's life. It's a measurement. It's, Carl, you own it. You could own it until you're 90 years old if your young daughter's still alive. What triggers the end of this estate is when the daughter dies. When the daughter dies, depending on what Austin said, did he say he wanted it to revert back? He did, didn't he? So in the language of the deed, when your young daughter dies, it's the measurement, it's the trigger. It will revert back to Austin. If Austin's not alive, it goes to his heirs, successors, and assigned, because it's going back to his side. Alrighty. While Carl owns it, and that's the reason we're talking about it right now. All of this we're talking about right now is willable. And this is a good test question. If you own property fee simple, you can will it. You can have it willed. If you own property, so long as you use it for a church, it's willable. The church can make a will, or the minister, and say where he wants it to go. If you own a property with a condition in it about not selling alcohol, it's willable. If you own property, Mr. Carl owns his property, it's not based on his life, is it? So he can make a will. And if Carl happens to, Carl's brother, right? If Carl dies before the young daughter dies, his will would be enforced. And let's just say it goes to John. John owns it as long as the young daughter is alive. If the young daughter dies, that's triggering that estate ends, and John will lose the estate, and it will go back to a reversion to the way it was originally written. So during this time, as long as the young daughter is alive, the current life tenant, the current life owner, that word tenant, I think, is what confuses students about, is it real ownership? We're not talking about renting. Tenant, think, I am the life possessor. I am in possession of it for my life, and I own it. Now, this one is based on the life of another. Question in the middle?
My question was, so the owner, no.
The owner right now is Carl.
So Carl is the owner, so he pays taxes, he can remodel, he can do additions, it is his to do with.
As long as it does not waste or ruin the property. Because he's really kind of owning it until somebody else owns it. right? He's kind of like a temporary owner, if you think about it. He owns it. He'll pay taxes on it. He can remodel. He can do things to upkeep and maintain the property. He can't do anything that would devalue it or ruin it because somebody else is tagged to own it in the future. So if there's a bunch of pristine timber, he can't come in there and have it all bulldozed down. Cannot. That's called wasting the property.
So piggybacking off of that, if he does all these improvements to the house or adds whatever, should it revert back to the original owner? Is he
Yes.
entitled to any of this?
He's entitled to all of it because it was all in the deed. No money changes hands.
Okay.
No money changes hands. Now, I'm not saying there couldn't be another little side arrangement, but that's above our pay grade. That would be what a lawyer and them would figure out, right? And, you know, that sounds like I'm just kind of shuffling aside, but it is above my pay grade. That's legal stuff. And I'm not going to say that to a buyer or a seller that asks me, but I'm going to say that's, I can't give you legal advice. I don't know legal advice. I suggest you ask a lawyer. If your brother's giving you this and you put money in it, that's a good question. Ask a lawyer how you would get any of that back. But keeping it basic, you own it, you can do with it what you want to. What if he doesn't keep it maintained, but it's not like falling down, but he just didn't maintain it? Well, the owner's going to get it the way it was. So, anyways, the daughter does not have an ownership interest at all. The daughter is just a benchmark. The daughter is just a gauge. Everybody with me? I would remember this one is willable because this is kind of testing area. Even in level 1, this is a good test. In other words, if they give you that scenario, can Austin, I'm getting my brothers mixed up. Carl. Oh, he died. I watched The Walking Dead. We watched it from the very first day.
Yes, I do.
Carl.
Except for this last season, just retired, but yes.
Okay, anyway. This is willable by the current owner, and the current owner is Carl. Austin doesn't have any rights to it right now, does, except future rights. They call it future interest. The brother who did the giving and did the transfer, he's got a reversionary interest. When the daughter dies, it comes back. And it's going to come back to fee simple. All right, go back with me if you will. Let's go to page 29. I want to show you something here. So in your chart, they've got the estates to the left are the ones that are willable. But in your reading, how do they word it? Estate, I'm on 29, top of page 29. And it says estates of inheritance. Do you see that? Guys, that's kind of awkward way. Maybe you don't quite understand it. I think it's not straightforward to me. Straightforward to me means this is willable. If you own a property any of these ways, it's willable. To the right of your chart, your diagram, the estates, the kind of interest you have that is not willable, there are 2 of them. One is another life estate and is called conventional or just simply life estate, and the other is a marital life estate. So let's talk about the life estate called conventional or just simply life estate. Go with me to page 31. And I want you to look at your example at the bottom. Page 31, example at the bottom. Now, this is the one Amber brought up, I think, that we most often think about. My mama has life rights. You know, you hear about things like that a lot. So mom has a life estate. She owns it for as long as she lives, and she may not will it. So what's happening in this situation, whoever gave, a man wants his children ultimately to own this property. Isn't this kind of a form of estate planning? You know, I want to keep the property in the family, but for right now, I want my mama to have a place to live. So we're gonna have a conveyance, a deed. Mama, you own it for your life. When your life ends, in the deed, the man who saw the attorney and has the deed drawn up, this person, the son, says to the lawyer, and here's what I want to happen when mama dies. Because mama does not have a right to will it. She owns it finite, almost finite with her life, right? And so the son, the man at the beginning, can say, Mom, when you die, I want it to revert back to me or my heirs. Or, Mama, when you die, I want it to go to Duke Hospital. Or I want it to go to my church. Or I want it to go to the animal shelter. Or I want it to go to the Wolfpack Club. Look at the looks I'm getting. Oh my God. Anyways, the whole point is, I want it to, it's the person who is given this life estate has a right to say who they want to get it when the life ends. And so naming those other places, everybody, is called a remainder man. So somebody other than the original owner named in the deed to get this property upon the death is called a remainder man. A remainder man estate. Third party. Perfect way to remember it. If there's a third party who's going to receive it upon the death, then that's called a remainder man estate. Until this happens, guys, folks have future interest in real estate, don't they? You've got a future interest in it. When the life ends, then that's when you get it. So third party is called remainder man. Everybody pretty good on that? Alrighty, look at your last paragraph on 31. Marital life estate. I think it'd be worth a minute for you to read that paragraph, if you will. Have you heard of that? Well, a lot of you are not from here, but North Carolina is a marital rights state. In North Carolina, you cannot disinherit your spouse. In North Carolina, when you own real estate and you're married, it takes two to sell in North Carolina. And so we'll talk about that when we talk about ownership, when we talk about tenants by the entirety. But this is saying, you know, one spouse just cannot disinherit the other spouse or go around the spouse not getting anything. So the state law says that spouse, the one who's left alive, has a right to choose a life estate. In other words, I want to live here for my life, and then the kids can have it when I die. And so they have a right to choose that. And now they're looking at, well, how long were you married? And they're looking at how long that might last maybe. But it's called a marital life estate, which would not be willable because it's going to be arranged that probably there are children who are going to get it after. Ma'am? Example would be, okay, you might not like my example because it might be sexist, but here we go. You marry somebody that owns their own property. And they own their own property, and you get married, but then they die without a will. Or they make a will and they say, I want my kids to get this property, and you're married and that's where you live, and so you're kind of out of it. The law's not going to let that happen. And so the law's going to say, you do have some marital rights. You might not get any money out of it, but you've got some marital rights, and you can choose to live there for a certain amount of time or a life estate, and because the ultimate goal is for the children to get it. Guys, lots of us have been married before. I'm not telling anybody who has, but lots of us have been married before, and lots of people have had children from prior marriages, and you really do need to think about how you want to own your real estate and what's going to happen to it. You do have to think ahead real quick.
Yeah, so if someone has, well, if the husband puts their name on the house and doesn't put they're married. The husband puts it on.
They're married at the time of the purchase?
As at the time of the purchase, but is thinking, that, they can't do that in North Carolina. They're thinking
No.
that they
Okay.
could go around it by having just their name.
No, you can buy property in your own name. You just can't oust the spouse when you die. You can buy property in your own name. Lots of people do for estate planning. And so you can buy in your own name. You can't sell without the spouse's signature.
Even though it's not on the title.
Hold that thought, because we're going to get there in a minute. Yeah, you can own in your own name, but you just can't, the spouse is going to have a marital interest. Whether that's the homestead or not, the spouse is going to have a marital interest that they're going to have to sign the deed to transfer the property to sell it. It's a North Carolina law. That's what makes North Carolina laws just a little bit different from other states. Real quick.
No, I'm saying, like it says, going to court, do the length of the marriage affect the property?
That's what it says now, that they might look at, they could choose, or that's kind of an elective choice. How long have you been married? What if you've just been married a year? And don't you think the kids are going to come in and have something to say about that? So I think that, huh?
It can be dismissible.
I don't know about dismissible. It's above my pay grade.
Can you rent these properties?
Why, well, the question Kate's saying is, can you rent it? Why would you not be able to? You could. Not trying to be a smart aleck, but you could. What if the spouse, legitimate question, spouse owns this property, she has a marital interest, she can rent it, she can do whatever she wants to, except will it? Sell it. You can sell it. Guys, you can sell. You just can't will. If it's based on a life, guys, I don't know of any time that the law's not going to come in and say you can't sell this. You can sell your property, but if there's a condition on a life, that's going to take priority. When the life ends, that's going to step in. My whole point is, in reality, who wants to buy a property that they're going to lose when somebody dies? So you won't see that on the real estate market, I don't think. Do you? Do you think that you'll be showing a house and look at the agent remarks, well, now you can buy this, but when Aunt B dies, you lose it. It's not, in my opinion, marketable, even though the owner has a right to gift it or sell it. One more question. We got to move on.
What about
Hold that thought. We're getting there. Hold that thought. All righty. Let's look. You all were asking about the rights of the tenant. And so we talked about that at the bottom of 32 and 33. This word tenant means possessor. You can even say owner right now. And then there could be tax advantages. When folks make these estates, like these life estates, when that person dies, everybody, it's not an inheritance. Does that make sense? If this is, if Austin gives to Carl based on the life of Carl's daughter, when the daughter dies, it's not an inheritance situation. It's an estate planning situation. So it could be advantageous tax-wise. It could be advantageous as far as privacy, avoiding any kind of probate, public, being known to the public. Or it could even avoid gift taxes. You can give a certain amount, a certain amount of value without paying tax on it. So this is a really good example of planning your estate. If you own a lot of property, you're wealthy, seeing an attorney, you'll get advice on how should we plan this out. Because most folks, when most people, if we're honest, we do want to have a game plan where all of our wealth doesn't go to taxes, don't we, if we're being honest about it. So anyways, homestead, legal estate occupied by the family home. Some states have different homestead acts. North Carolina is about money, it's about other creditors. In other words, if someone, let's say, if someone is being sued for something, major lawsuit, and money, what do they call it, civil action, somebody being sued for money, they're up to a point, you're not going to have to sell your home to pay that civil monetary damage on your lawsuit. Now, if it's about other creditors, you know, it's about, so if somebody's suing you civilly, the only example I can think of, and it might not be politically correct, but I think it's a pretty good example. When O.J. Simpson was tried for murder, he was not convicted, was he? But didn't the family sue him for civilly, for money? He didn't have to sell his home to pay them. Any other income, books, movies, things like that, that's where they get their money. So your homestead is protected up to a certain amount of, they're giving you some money, monetary numbers there. And but this is really more about just creditors. What if you owe a big credit card number? They can't make you sell your house to pay them, you know, if it's your homestead. So that's really kind of what that's about. All right. Let's go on over to page 34, because you guys are dying to know about the husband-wife thing. Everybody wants to know about that. Usually it's the single guys who want to know about this. But anyway, so we're going to talk about ownership. So what we were talking about is what kind of interest are you having, and this is going to be who owns it, and how we're going to own a property. But I'd like you to take your break, and let's keep it to 10 minutes. We rolled around another 50 minutes. Let's keep it to 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and see how far we can get.